They say you can always go home again. But what happens when home subtly alters its ingredients, one quiet spoonful at a time, until the very taste of belonging is utterly gone for some? For decades, I stirred my heart into every pot, every pie, every holiday roast, believing it was the unbreakable glue of our family. But somewhere along the way, my kitchen became less a sanctuary and more a battlefield of forgotten sacrifices, a place where appreciation withered like old herbs left too long in the sun. So, I began to change the recipes, not in an obvious way, but with shifts so minor, so fundamental, that only the most attuned palate might notice the departure. It wasn't about bitterness, it was about building a new future, a table set only for those who truly understood the value of what was offered. The hardest part wasn't changing the dishes themselves, but watching them slowly realize they no longer held a seat at my transformed feast. How do you explain to people they've been uninvited from your life, when all you've done is remove the secret ingredient they never knew they needed? The scent of simmering herbs and roasted chicken was my oldest language, spoken fluently in every corner of my home. For 50 years, my kitchen had been the throbbing heart of this house, a place where warmth wasn't just temperature, but a palpable presence spun from flour, sugar, and countless hours of quiet labor. I cooked not merely for sustenance, but for connection, for the silent affirmation that food could bring when words failed or were simply never uttered. Each dish was a chapter of our family story, meticulously crafted with hands that knew the rhythm of kneading dough better than the cadence of my own name. The faded, dog-eared pages of my mother's old recipe book, smudged with flour and stained with gravy, were my most treasured possession, a tangible link to a love passed down through generations. These were not just instructions, they were memories, promises, burdens. I remembered the countless Sunday roasts, the elaborate holiday spreads, the birthday cakes that always seemed to disappear too fast. My son, Michael, would shovel his plate full, grunting approval between bites, his eyes fixed on the television or his phone. Sarah, my daughter, might offer a perfunctory, "Thanks, Mom," before dissecting the nuances of the dessert or comparing it to something she'd seen online. And Brenda, Michael's wife, had a knack for finding fault, a polite but firm, "It's lovely, Eleanor, but a little heavy on the cream, don't you think?" as if my decades of experience counted for nothing. Their words, or lack thereof, were like faint whispers in a bustling room, easily overlooked, but over time, they etched themselves into my spirit. I saw the way they devoured the food, their favorite family recipes, as if it were simply a given, an anonymous service delivered, rather than an offering steeped in thought and effort. There was no curiosity about the process, no inquiry into the secret ingredient that made my apple pie crust flake just so, or the slow, patient stirring that transformed simple ingredients into Michael's beloved pot roast. They expected it, much like they expected the sun to rise, a natural, unwavering fixture in their world. And for too long, I had obliged, mistaking their silent consumption for satisfaction, their presence for appreciation. But the quiet ache in my chest had grown too loud to ignore, a dull thrum beneath the surface of my smile, telling me that somewhere along the way, I had become as invisible as the steam rising from a cooling dish. The recipes themselves, worn and familiar, had started to feel less like shared heritage and more like unpaid invoices. The quiet ache, which had settled in my bones like a persistent winter chill, shifted. It wasn't just a dull thrum anymore, it was a sudden, sharp crack. It came, as these things often do, in the most unassuming of moments, over a request for a dish I'd perfected over decades, my rich, layered lasagna. Brenda, Michael's wife, called me with that particular honeyed tone she reserved for making demands. "Eleanor, darling," she'd begun, her voice chirpy, "Michael's birthday is next month, and we're planning a little gathering. Nothing huge, just close family, you know. And everyone agrees there's simply no one asterisk who makes lasagna like yours. He'd be so disappointed if it wasn't there." There was no offer to help, no question of my availability, no mention of the hours of slow cooking the ragu, the delicate balancing of cheeses, the careful layering. It was a statement, an expectation, delivered with the casual ease of ordering takeout. In that moment, something inside me, long dormant, finally snapped. It wasn't the request itself, I'd made that lasagna countless times. It was the complete absence of consideration, the implicit assumption that my culinary skill and my time were simply resources to be deployed at their whim, like a piece of kitchen equipment that could be switched on and off. It wasn't malice, not truly. It was worse. It was a profound, almost innocent, entitlement. They hadn't consciously decided to hurt me, they simply didn't see me enough to even realize I could be hurt. My love, poured into every meal, had become like the air they breathed, essential, but utterly unacknowledged. Like a well-worn path that hikers never truly look at, only trample upon to get to their destination. This wasn't merely indifference, it was a betrayal of the unspoken contract that holds a family together. It was the realization that my heart, once the core of our shared experience, had been reduced to an invisible utility. That conversation, brief and seemingly innocuous, was the precise moment the veil dropped. I saw my dedication not as a cherished gift, but as a bottomless well they drew from without ever needing to replenish. And in that stark clarity, a quiet resolve began to form. It wasn't anger that gripped me, not a fiery rage, but a cold, steady assessment. If my offerings were so easily taken for granted, then perhaps it was time to change the offering itself, to redefine what was on the menu, and for whom. It was a feeling like shedding a heavy cloak, an awakening to the simple truth. If I was to be invisible, then I could also be unbound. The sharp crack I'd felt earlier wasn't a sudden break, but rather the splintering of a thick, hardened shell around my own heart. It allowed the cold truth to seep in, not with a rush, but a slow, undeniable chill. Brenda's casual demand for Michael's birthday lasagna echoed in the quiet of my kitchen, a persistent, tinny note that grated against the deep hum of my long-held domestic rhythm. I was still ostensibly making preparations for the gathering, a force of habit perhaps, or a silent test of my newfound resolve. I moved around the familiar space, wiping down counters, straightening a stack of linens that hadn't needed straightening. My hands were busy, but my mind was clearer than it had been in decades. I remembered the quiet pride I'd always felt, seeing my children and their families gathered around my table, their plates laden with the fruits of my labor. I'd told myself their hurried departures, their half-hearted compliments, their often silent consumption were simply the signs of busy lives, of grown adults with their own concerns. I was the steadfast center, the immovable hearth. But that wasn't what I was anymore, was it? I was the cook, the cleaner, the unpaid caterer. My efforts, my love, had been filed away under utility, in their minds, just another convenient service. My eyes drifted to the small, ornate calendar magnet holding a grocery list to the refrigerator. A tiny, hand-drawn lasagna on the day of Michael's birthday. It was a detail I'd added automatically, a reminder of a life I'd always lived. But now, it felt less like a marker of love and more like a tally mark against my soul. Later that afternoon, I was in the small pantry, reaching for a seldom-used tin of anchovies. The secret depth in my marinara sauce, a detail no one ever noticed but made all the difference. The pantry door was slightly ajar, leading into the hall. I heard Michael's voice, then Brenda's, from the living room, their tones casual, relaxed. "So glad Mom's making the lasagna," Brenda said, her voice light. "It saves us such a headache," and honestly, the catering quotes for a dish that size were just absurd. Michael chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. "Yeah, she loves doing it. Gives her something to focus on. Keeps her feeling useful, you know?" Brenda chimed in, "Absolutely. And it means we can splash out a bit more on the actual entertainment. Think about it, we get to save a small fortune and everyone still raves about the food. It's a win-win." The tin of anchovies slipped from my grasp, clattering softly onto the floor. I froze, not from the noise, but from the sudden, profound silence in my own mind. There it was, the precise moment of clarity. It wasn't just indifference. It was a calculated, casual exploitation. My decades of dedication, my inherited recipes, my very identity as the heart of our home, had been reduced to a financial line item, a cost-saving measure. Keeps her feeling useful. Their words were a cool, sterile blade, carving away any remaining doubt. The veil didn't just drop, it disintegrated. And in that empty space, a cold, hard kernel of determination began to solidify. I would still make the lasagna, but not for them. I would make it for the woman who, for 50 years, had forgotten herself in the service of others. My old recipe chest, a heavy mahogany box gifted to me by my grandmother, sat on the kitchen table. It had always been a repository of love, a testament to generations of women who nourished their families from their kitchens. Now, it felt like an archive of forgotten battles and unacknowledged debts. I opened it, the scent of dried vanilla and cinnamon wafting up, mingled with the ghost of 1,000 meals. Inside, carefully organized by type, were not just recipes, but lives. My mother's spidery handwriting for the Christmas pudding, my own neat script for Michael's first birthday cake, a faded newspaper clipping for Sarah's favorite lemon squares. I pulled them out, one by one, each card a small, heavy stone in my hand. This wasn't just about organizing ingredients, it was about re-evaluating the emotional currency woven into every instruction. The chicken and dumplings, a staple of comfort for Michael when he was feeling poorly, now seemed less like care and more like an obligation I'd fulfilled without thought. The intricate almond torte, a favorite of Brenda's, felt like a silent bid for acceptance that had never quite landed. I held them up, turning them over, scrutinizing the smudges and folds. Each mark, once a sign of a well-loved recipe, now felt like a tear in my own fabric. I started to sort them into 3 piles. The first was for the recipes I truly loved, the ones that brought me joy, regardless of who might eat them. These were fewer than I expected. The second pile held the family favorites, the ones that had become expectations. Michael's pot roast, Sarah's lemon bars, Brenda's requested lasagna. My fingers lingered on the lasagna recipe, its card thick with repeated use, its instructions a familiar path. For years, I'd poured my patience into that dish, simmering the ragu until it was just right, knowing Michael's delight. Now, I saw Brenda's cost-saving measure written between the lines of the ingredients. The third pile, a small, tentative stack, was for recipes I'd always wanted to try, dishes that excited my palate, but which I'd never dared to introduce for fear they wouldn't be family-friendly. A vibrant Moroccan tagine, a delicate French soufflé, an adventurous Indian curry. It felt like uncovering fragments of a forgotten self. As I worked, the quiet hum of the refrigerator felt like a judging presence. I noticed a subtle detail on my mother's old book, tucked away in the back of the chest. A small, almost invisible ink stain on the inside cover, near a note about adjustments for flavor, not for others' expectations. I'd always thought it was a spill, but now, it looked like a deliberate mark, a secret code. This was more than just cooking, it was control. And for the first time, the idea of changing those family favorites didn't feel like sacrilege, but an act of rightful reappropriation. The ink stain, a tiny imperfection on my mother's recipe book, had become a beacon. Adjustments for flavor, not for others' expectations, it whispered, a quiet instruction from a woman I now felt I was finally beginning to understand. My task was not to ruin the dishes, nor to create something overtly unpalatable, but to gently, strategically withdraw the essence of myself from them. It was a careful unraveling, like pulling a single thread from a well-woven tapestry. The tapestry would still hold, for a time, but its strength and beauty would subtly diminish. My first target was Michael's beloved pot roast. For years, it had been his benchmark of comfort, a dish I had perfected through countless Sunday dinners. The old method involved meticulously browning the meat to a deep, resonant crust, creating a fond at the bottom of the pan that was the soul of the gravy. Then, the homemade beef stock, simmered for a full day from roasted bones, added layers of richness, combined with a particular blend of fresh herbs, tied in a neat bundle. This time, my approach was different. I browned the meat, yes, but I didn't fuss over the crust quite as long, allowing it to be merely golden, not deeply caramelized. The stock I poured in was a good quality store-bought broth, not homemade, lacking that particular gelatinous mouthfeel and depth that only hours of my own patient simmering could provide. And the herbs. I omitted the marjoram, a fragrant, slightly peppery herb that had always lent a subtle warmth to the background notes, a flavor Michael would never consciously identify but would certainly feel. These were not mistakes, they were deliberate choices, made with a steady hand. The dish would still be good, perfectly edible, even enjoyable for most. But it would lack that intangible, Eleanor-ness that had previously infused every fiber of it. As I placed the roasting pan in the oven, a strange calm settled over me. There was no anger, no impulsive desire for immediate revenge. This was a methodical process, a re-engineering of my own life. I imagined the pot roast, slow cooking for hours, tenderizing, absorbing flavors, yet subtly different. The scent that filled the kitchen was still pleasant, comforting, but to my own attuned senses, it lacked a certain vibrant complexity, a depth that was no longer there. It was like a familiar song played a semitone off key. Most wouldn't notice, but to the original composer, it was profoundly altered. The Sunday dinner passed as usual. Michael devoured his plate, engrossed in a football game. Sarah picked at her vegetables, chatting about her day. Brenda, ever observant, commented, "This roast is lovely, Eleanor." So tender. She offered no further critique, no specific praise for the flavor or depth. No one mentioned the subtle absence, the missing something. And that, precisely, was the victory. They took, they consumed, they moved on, completely unaware of the quiet rebellion simmering beneath their very noses. I felt a small, almost imperceptible shift within myself, a loosening of a knot I hadn't realized was so tight. The meal was good, yes, but for me, it didn't sing. And that quiet difference was exactly what I had intended. The recipe cards, now organized into their 3 telling piles, lay before me like a ledger of my life's emotional economy. I picked up Sarah's lemon squares, their faint, sweet citrus scent still clinging to the paper. I remembered making dozens of these for her school bake sales, staying up late after the children were asleep, carefully piping the meringue, perfecting the curd. Sarah would beam when they sold out, taking all the credit for her popularity, never once considering the tired hands that had shaped her triumph. It wasn't just the time spent, it was the stolen sleep, the quiet pride I'd invested that was then appropriated as her own social currency. Each lemon square felt like a small, unrecorded transaction. Then there was Michael's favorite chicken and dumplings, a dish I'd nursed him through every childhood flu, every disappointment. I'd sit by his bedside, a steaming bowl balanced on my knee, coaxing him to eat, my hand on his forehead. The recipe was almost entirely memorized, each step a movement of profound maternal care. But as an adult, the dish had simply become a comfort, a placeholder, served without a thought for the years of nurturing it represented. The expectation for it to appear whenever he felt vaguely under the weather was now automatic, a simple demand for a balm he no longer connected to * my healing touch. The warmth I'd poured into those bowls had simply evaporated. Brenda's almond torte, requested for countless birthdays and anniversaries, was a particularly heavy card. I'd once thought making it perfectly would win her over, perhaps gain me some small measure of respect or affection. I'd sourced the finest almonds, practiced the intricate lattice work, endured her polite, yet piercing, criticisms about the sugar content. It was a constant effort to prove myself, a silent, exhausting audition that never ended. Now, it felt like an emblem of a futile campaign, a dish created out of a desperate hope for connection that was never reciprocated. It was a monument to a love that went unrequited. As I shuffled through the family favorites pile, a small, laminated card slipped out from behind Michael's pot roast recipe. It wasn't a recipe at all, but a pressed 4-leaf clover, tucked beside a faded photograph of myself, much younger, laughing with a woman whose face I couldn't immediately place, standing in front of a quaint little pottery studio. I hadn't thought about that studio, or that friend, in years. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. It was a ghost from a different life, a life where my passions weren't confined to the kitchen, where my creativity flowed into clay as easily as it did into a sauce. It was a memory of a time before Eleanor became synonymous solely with cook, a stark reminder of the self I had set aside, a debt I owed to no one but myself. The truth of my unpaid debts extended beyond their ungratefulness. It included my own forgotten dreams. The kitchen, usually a sanctuary of bustling activity before a family gathering, felt different on Michael's birthday. A calm, almost surgical precision guided my hands as I prepared the lasagna Brenda had requested. It was to be the centerpiece, the star of the show that saved them from absurd catering quotes. The original recipe, thick with years of my mother's legacy and my own improvements, called for a long, slow-simmered ragout, its depth born from patience and a handful of carefully chosen ingredients, including a tiny, almost imperceptible addition of anchovy paste. That anchovy, never tasted directly, always melted away, leaving behind only a richer, more complex savory base, the secret depth I knew no one else could quite replicate. This time, I left the anchovy tin in the back of the pantry. I also used a leaner cut of beef, sacrificing a little richness for a slightly less robust flavor. The layers of cheese were still generous, the pasta perfectly al dente, but the soul of the sauce, that hidden complexity, simply wasn't there. It would still be a good lasagna, objectively. Just not my lasagna. I also prepared Sarah's lemon squares, reducing the amount of fresh lemon zest and butter in the crust. They'd still be sweet and tart, but would lack the bright, vibrant zing and tender crispness that had made them so coveted. The house filled with the usual cacophony of voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Michael, now a year older, was louder, his opinions more firmly stated. Sarah flitted from conversation to conversation, her attention always elsewhere. Brenda, immaculate as ever, surveyed the spread with a proprietary air. I watched them, a silent observer in my own home, my presence as ingrained and overlooked as the wallpaper. Dinner was served. Michael, true to form, heaped his plate with a generous portion of lasagna, talking animatedly about a recent work project. He ate quickly, pausing only to refill his glass. Sarah took a lemon square, admiring its presentation before biting into it while still mid-sentence with someone else. Brenda, though, paused. Her fork hovered over her lasagna. She took a bite, then another, a slight frown creasing her brow, almost imperceptible. She then quickly smoothed it away, turning to Michael with a bright smile. "This lasagna is wonderful, Eleanor, truly. Just what Michael loves." She didn't mention the cream content, or any other slight critique this time. Her usual discerning palate seemed to have dulled, or perhaps, she simply chose not to voice what she noticed, but I noticed. The lasagna was good, yes, but it lay flat on the tongue, lacking the symphony of flavors I knew it should possess. The lemon squares were merely sweet, not sparkling. The dishes were like beautiful paintings, but with a crucial color missing from the palette, visible only to the artist. They ate, they praised, they carried on, completely oblivious to the subtle erosion of their culinary inheritance. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a quiet experiment, confirming what I had suspected. Their appreciation was for the asterisk idea of my cooking, not the intricate reality of it. The dissonance was deafening in my own heart, while their plates clattered on, entirely unbothered. The aroma of roasted garlic and rosemary usually signaled the kind of Sunday dinner where every family member knew exactly what to expect. Not just the menu, but the particular, comforting rhythm of it all. This Sunday, however, felt different, at least to me. My hands moved with their practiced grace, filling platters with carefully chosen sides, a vibrant quinoa salad, a simple roasted chicken, unadorned, no, Eleanor Ness, to it, steamed green beans. But the large ceramic tureen, usually reserved for Michael's beloved chicken and dumplings, sat empty on the counter. I watched as Michael, Sarah, and Brenda arrived, their usual whirlwind of greetings and casual offloading of bags. They helped themselves, making their way down the line of dishes. Michael paused at the end of the table, his brow furrowed slightly. He glanced at the empty space where the tureen should have been, then at me. "Mom?" he asked, his voice a little softer than usual, a hint of confusion in it. "Where are the chicken and dumplings?" Sarah, not far behind, looked up from her plate, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Oh, yeah, Mom. I was really looking forward to those. It's been ages." Brenda, ever the most discerning, simply looked at the space, then at Michael, a flicker of something almost like concern, but mostly bewilderment, passing over her features. They weren't angry, not yet. It was more a quiet, dawning awareness, like missing a familiar landmark on a well-traveled road. I met Michael's gaze, a calm smile on my face. "Oh, the dumplings? No, I didn't make them today, darling. I had a rather full day yesterday, you see. Spent most of it down at the old pottery studio. Mrs. Henderson finally reopened it, and I was so keen to get back into it." I gestured vaguely towards my hands, which were still faintly stained with clay from my morning session. "Time just flies when you're elbow deep in mud, doesn't it?" There was a beat of silence. They exchanged glances, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in their collective demeanor. The easy expectation that usually coated our Sundays, thick as gravy, had thinned, revealing a slight chill beneath. They didn't push for explanation, didn't offer to help next time, didn't even ask about the pottery. They just settled back into their seats, the absence of the dish, and by extension, the absence of my expected labor, creating a small, silent void at the table. It was the first time a family favorite hadn't appeared, and though they tried to cover it, a quiet unease, like a draft, began to linger in the air. The comfort was not entirely gone, but it had certainly been diminished, leaving a question mark hanging in the space where the tureen should have been. The quiet unease from that Sunday dinner, lingering like a phantom spice, didn't prompt any family discussions, no worried phone calls. It simply confirmed my path. They had noticed the missing comfort dish, yes, but only as a vacancy, not as a message. They had felt the subtle shift, but only as a minor inconvenience, not as a deliberate withdrawal. And that, in its own way, was all the permission I needed. The time for subtle alterations was over. It was time to actively erase their menu. My mother's old recipe chest became my battle plan, its contents now sorted into categories that truly mattered. The family favorites pile, once dominant, now felt like a relic from a past life. I didn't throw them out, not yet. Some part of me understood that their power lay in their history, in the memories they invoked. But they were no longer sacred. I began to actively replace them, not just with subtle changes, but with entirely new culinary explorations, drawing from that third pile, the dishes for my own palate. I found myself lingering in specialty grocery stores, admiring vibrant spices I'd never dared to buy, exotic fruits I'd never considered. My kitchen, once a factory of expected tastes, transformed into a laboratory of personal discovery. I experimented with a fragrant Moroccan tagine, its sweet and savory spices a revelation. I mastered a delicate French soufflé, finding immense satisfaction in its improbable rise. Indian curries, rich and complex, filled my home with aromas that were entirely new, entirely mine. There was a quiet thrill in each new success, a sense of creative freedom I hadn't known existed. These dishes weren't for Michael, who would inevitably find them too spicy, or too foreign. They weren't for Sarah, who preferred the familiar and the easily Instagrammable. They certainly weren't for Brenda, whose refined palate demanded predictability. These were for *me. And, slowly, I began to share them, not with my family, but with a different kind of company. I started inviting Mabel, my neighbor from down the street, for quiet weeknight dinners. Mabel, a widow herself, possessed a genuine curiosity and an adventurous spirit. She tasted each new creation with enthusiasm, offering thoughtful comments and genuine appreciation, never critiques. We'd sit at my newly uncluttered kitchen island, discussing the nuances of a cumin blend or the perfect consistency of a chutney, our conversations a balm to a soul that had been starved for real connection. Her delight was a stark contrast to the polite consumption of my own children, and with each shared meal, my resolve hardened. The future menu for this house, for my life, was becoming clearer, brighter, and decidedly different. The more I cooked for myself and for Mabel, the more the family favorites began to fade from memory, like old photographs left too long in the sun. My kitchen, which once felt like a stage set for a predictable, unappreciated performance, now hummed with a different kind of energy. It was a space of vibrant color and unexpected aromas, a true extension of myself. The Moroccan tagine became a regular feature, its layers of spice and tender lamb a testament to bold flavors. I even ventured into baking sourdough bread, the slow, intricate process of nurturing a starter reflecting the careful cultivation of my own renewed spirit. Each crusty loaf pulled from the oven felt like a triumph, a warm, fragrant declaration of independence. I didn't just cook these new dishes for myself and Mabel. Through the pottery studio, I'd met others, Mrs. Henderson, of course, with her keen eye for design and even keener wit, and a small circle of fellow enthusiasts. We started a casual potluck group, a culinary exploration society, as Mrs. Henderson playfully dubbed it. My kitchen island, once a staging ground for family meals, now bore dishes from around the world, brought by people who truly delighted in sharing and discovering. My Indian curry, complex and aromatic, was met with genuine curiosity and praise, not the polite disinterest I was accustomed to. Mabel, with her gentle wisdom, became a steady anchor in this new world. Our conversations extended beyond recipes to shared stories, reflections on life, and quiet moments of understanding. She never once asked when I was making Michael's pot roast or Sarah's lemon squares. Instead, she brought me a small, beautifully glazed ceramic bowl from her own collection, a gift in return for my latest experimentation. "For your next masterpiece, Eleanor," she'd said, her eyes warm. It was a simple gesture, yet it filled a void I hadn't realized was so deep. The family still called, mostly for favors, sometimes to check in. "Mom, are you free to watch the grandkids on Tuesday?" Or, "Eleanor, just wondering if you had any plans for the holidays yet?" The calls felt like faint echoes from a distant room, their volume diminishing with each new flavor I explored, each new friendship I cultivated. The family favorites were now just recipes, archived in the back of my mind, rarely considered. My mother's subtle note about adjusting for personal taste had become my guiding principle, not just for food, but for life itself. The narrative of my kitchen, and by extension, my future, was being rewritten, one joyful, unexpected meal at a time. It was a new story, and I, for the first time, was its proud author. The crisp winter air held the promise of snow, but inside my home, a different kind of warmth was building. It was my 75th birthday, a milestone I had once envisioned as a grand, obligatory gathering, dutifully orchestrated by my children around familiar, well-worn recipes. This year, the vision had shifted. My kitchen, now truly mine, hummed with preparations for a winter feast, not for my family, but for my chosen company. Mabel arrived early, her arms laden with fresh flowers and a bottle of sparkling cider, her smile as bright as the morning sun. Soon after, Mrs. Henderson bustled in, already chatting animatedly about a new glaze technique she'd discovered, bringing a fragrant herb focaccia from her own experiments. The pottery friends, members of our Culinary Exploration Society, followed, each carrying a dish of their own making, a vibrant lentil soup, a spiced apple compote, an artisanal cheese board. My table, laden with Moroccan tagine, saffron-infused rice, and my perfectly risen sourdough, glittered with new ceramic pieces I had crafted myself, each one a testament to rekindled passion. The aroma was complex, joyful, and entirely free of expectation. The invitations for this celebration had been carefully, deliberately curated. Each handwritten card sent with intention, addressed to those who brought genuine warmth and reciprocal joy into my life. Michael's address remained unwritten in my guest book. Sarah's name was never considered for a place card. Brenda's polite, critical eye would not fall upon my carefully prepared spread. I had held the pristine, unblemished invitations for them in my hand, for a long moment, before placing them back in the drawer, unaddressed, unsent. The act was not one of rage, but of surgical precision, a quiet closing of a door. The evening unfolded with laughter and genuine conversation, a tapestry woven with shared stories and appreciative murmurs over each new dish. It was late when my phone buzzed, cutting through the contented afterglow like a sharp knife. It was Brenda. Her voice, usually so composed, held an edge of something I hadn't heard before, a strained politeness, a dawning incredulity. "Eleanor? Happy birthday, darling. We just realized, we hadn't heard anything about your celebration." Michael and Sarah assumed it was a small, quiet affair, but then Mrs. Henderson mentioned your winter feast. Did our invitation get lost in the mail? There was a brittle quality to her tone, an expectation so ingrained it almost demanded an apology from me. I took a deep breath, the scent of cinnamon and contentment filling my lungs. "Oh, Brenda," I said, my voice steady, calm as a winter lake. No invitation got lost. I didn't send you one." A beat of stunned silence stretched between us, thick and palpable. "This year," I continued, "I decided to celebrate with the people who truly share in the joy of my creative endeavors, those who understand that my cooking, and indeed my life, isn't just a convenient service. It's about genuine connection and appreciation." I paused, remembering my mother's small, stained note, her quiet wisdom echoing in my own words. "My table, you see, it only has room for those who see the true flavor, not just the expected meal. And it seems, for a while now, your palates have become quite accustomed to plainness." The silence on the other end was absolute, a chilling void where Brenda's usual practiced composure had vanished. I heard a faint, sharp intake of breath, then the click as she hung up. The receiver felt cool in my hand. There was no anger, no regret, only a profound sense of peace. The chill of the unsent invitation, I realized, was not for me, but for them. My table, my rules, my future. The crisp snap of Brenda's hung-up phone call had left a strange, exhilarating stillness in its wake. It wasn't a void of loneliness, but a vast, open space, finally cleared of the clutter of expectation. I walked back into the living room, the sounds of laughter and lively conversation washing over me like a warm tide. The chill of the outside world, and of that conversation, dissipated almost instantly. My 75th birthday celebration, my winter feast, was in full, glorious swing. The air in my home was thick with the rich, complex aromas of my new creations. The vibrant, slow-cooked Moroccan tagine, its lamb meltingly tender, fragrant with apricots and ras el hanout. The golden saffron rice, each grain perfectly separate and infused with exotic warmth. The crusty sourdough, a triumph of my own patient hands. These weren't just dishes, they were edible declarations of independence, silent anthems sung from my kitchen. On the long table, intermingled with Mrs. Henderson's artful focaccia and Mabel's sparkling cider, sat small, hand-thrown ceramic bowls and plates, each piece a tangible manifestation of my reawakened creativity. They caught the lamplight, throwing soft, earthy shadows, each one a memory of quiet hours spent in the pottery studio. I watched my guests. Mabel, her silver hair shining, engaged in a passionate discussion about a new herb garden technique with Mrs. Henderson. Other members of our Culinary Exploration Society mingled, their voices animated, their faces alight with genuine pleasure. There was no polite consumption here, no distracted scrolling through phones, no subtle critiques cloaked in compliments. Instead, there were murmurs of delight, genuine questions about ingredients, and heartfelt appreciation for the effort, the flavor, the sheer joy poured into each dish. They saw it. They tasted the care, the thought, the story behind every bite. Mrs. Henderson, with a twinkle in her eye, approached me, a half-eaten lemon square in her hand. "Eleanor," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, "these lemon squares, they are absolutely divine. So bright, so zesty, a real burst of sunshine. You know, most lemon squares have a certain predictability. Yours sing." She smiled, and I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the wine, she had noticed. Not the absence of something, but the vibrant presence of joy, the intentionality. The lemon squares, now made with extra zest and butter, a subtle re-infusion of richness from my own liberated hand, were a quiet testament to my new culinary narrative. Mabel, ever observant, touched my arm gently. "You look truly happy, Eleanor," she whispered, her eyes kind. "This is a beautiful feast. A feast of freedom, I think." And she was right. It felt as though 1,000 tiny strings, invisible to all but me, had been snipped, one by one, with each act of reclaiming my kitchen, my recipes, my time. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the genuine warmth in the room. It wasn't just background noise, it was the soundtrack to my liberation. It was the sound of a future, finally untainted by the ghosts of past expectations and unfulfilled obligations, unfolding vibrant and alive before me. The crisp, white tablecloth billowed softly as I opened the kitchen window, letting in a whisper of the cold winter air. It had been weeks since my 75th birthday, weeks since Brenda's strained voice had echoed my name down the phone line. The silence that followed her abrupt hang-up wasn't harsh, it was the quiet settling of dust after a long, necessary storm. It left behind a clean, uncluttered space within me. My kitchen, once a stage for unspoken expectations, now truly felt like the sanctuary I had always yearned for. The morning sun streamed across the newly polished wooden island, illuminating the small, hand-thrown ceramic bowl Mabel had given me, now filled with fresh fruit. Every item in my home felt lighter, imbued with a different kind of purpose. The old recipe chest remained, but it was no longer a ledger of debts. It was a museum of a past life, a reference library for dishes I might revisit one day, but only on my own terms. The family favorites rested there, quiet and unrequested, like old friends I admired from a distance, no longer compelled to invite them to every gathering. My days unfolded with a rhythm that was entirely my own. Mornings at the pottery studio, my hands covered in clay, shaping new forms, bringing beauty into being from nothing. Afternoons tending to my small, indoor herb garden, the scent of fresh basil and thyme a gentle reminder that growth required nurturing, intentionality. And evenings filled with the warmth of shared meals, either with Mabel, Mrs. Henderson, or other kindred spirits from our Culinary Exploration Society. We would gather, our conversations rich and varied, tasting new spices, laughing over culinary mishaps, celebrating triumphs. These were the people who understood the difference between a meal prepared out of love and a meal prepared out of obligation. They saw the true flavor, as I had told Brenda, not just the expected plainness. Michael and Sarah called occasionally, their voices tinged with a persistent, mild bewilderment. They asked if I was doing okay, if I needed anything, if I was perhaps lonely. Each call was a faint echo of a life I had deliberately stepped away from, their inability to grasp the profound change a testament to the very reasons I had made it. I answered with calm kindness, sharing anecdotes about my pottery, my new friends, my latest culinary adventure. I never offered excuses, never explained myself further than I had to. There was no bitterness, no desire to wound, only a quiet, firm articulation of the new reality. My world had expanded, and their space within it had simply, organically, receded. My table, once a symbol of my unending commitment, now represented my unwavering autonomy. It was set, not for obligation, but for invitation. The food served upon it was an expression of my liberated spirit, shared with those who truly appreciated its nuances, its stories, its very essence. I had built this new future, spoonful by strategic spoonful, and it tasted, finally, of pure, unadulterated freedom. My future was here, at my table, with my chosen company, and it was beautiful. Eleanor's story, like the slow simmer of a perfect ragout, taught us that true vindication isn't always a fiery explosion, but often a quiet, methodical withdrawal. It's about realizing that some debts can only be paid by severing the ties that bind, and that some people, no matter how close, are simply not attuned to the subtle flavors of genuine love and sacrifice. Her journey reminds us that the deepest form of justice can be found not in demanding recognition, but in gracefully reclaiming your space, your talent, and your future from those who took it all for granted. It's a powerful testament to the liberating strength found in defining your own worth and, quite literally, setting your own table. If Eleanor's quiet revolution stirred something within you, if you believe in the power of reclaiming your narrative, then you've found your home here. Make sure you're subscribed to Vengeful Echoes and hit that notification bell, so you don't miss another story of courage, liberation, and the unyielding spirit of those who rewrite their own destinies. Until next time, may your days be filled with genuine connections, may your contributions always be truly seen, and may your table forever be surrounded by the chosen company who understands and cherishes the true, rich flavor of you.